Major General George B. McClellan's energy and competence, as well as his attention to discipline and detail, molded the Army of the Potomac into a first-rate fighting force. What at the time must have seemed a great sense of purpose and confidence has struck many a modern historian as a bit of a messianic complex. In an August letter to his wife, Mary Ellen, he asserted that the people call upon me to save the country. I must save it and cannot respect anything that is in the way. At this early point in his tenure, the anything getting in the way was America's foremost soldier, McClellan's commanding general, Winfield Scott. There was absolutely no doubt that at 75 years of age, Scott was nearing the end of his glorious career. His declining health and penchant for napping during the workday were becoming an impediment to the war effort. Scott might put in 4 hours of work at his desk each day, while his field commander seldom logged less than 16. McClellan had neither the temperament or the time to harness himself to this ineffectual chain of command. A novice president did little to help the situation when, on July 27th, he bypassed Scott and asked McClellan to draft a strategy for winning the war. America's preeminent soldier had become resentful of the young Napoleon for his direct communications with the president and cabinet members. On the 8th of August, McClellan wrote Mary Ellen that he could not possibly save the country when stopped by General Scott. Whether he was among the traitors or simply a dotard, he could not tell, but that confounded old general was an imbecile and always got in his way. Simmering anger on the part of Scott exploded into open hostility with McClellan's August 8th memorandum. The report McClellan submitted, in the words of historian James McPherson, highlighted what turned out to be McClellan's main defect as a military commander, an alarmist tendency to inflate enemy strengths and intentions. The young Napoleon claimed to be facing an enemy of 100,000 effectives. In reality, he had less than half that number before him. McClellan believed his present force was entirely insufficient for the emergency. Scott saw the report as an insult and in no way accepted the general's estimates of the danger of imminent attack. Scott dressed down his subordinate, and soon after, General Scott asked the president to be allowed to retire. President Lincoln worked to smooth over the dispute. Scott agreed to stay on, and McClellan agreed to withdraw his memorandum. A month later, McClellan, in a communication to Secretary of War Cameron, insisted that if the commander-in-chief of the enemy follows the simplest dictates of the military art, we must meet him with greatly inferior forces. President Lincoln was able to stay on better terms with McClellan for a bit longer than General Scott. For a time, both were on the same page. Immediately after Bull Run, the president feared another military blunder. He would not push his unprepared army forward and believed that success needed to be certain before another blow was struck. In addition, at this early stage of the war, both the president and McClellan held similar views when it came to the question of union and slavery. Saving the union came first. The slavery question was incidental and subsidiary. In a letter to Samuel Barlow, Little Mac was blunt. The president, he said, is perfectly honest and really sound on the Negro question. Despite mounting political pressure, Lincoln assured his field commander that he would not be asked to move before the general was ready. By the end of October, despite excellent weather which would continue well into December, the young Napoleon had resigned himself to inaction. To Mary Ellen he wrote, "I am doing all that I can do to get ready to move before winter sets in. But it now begins to look as if we are condemned to a winter of inactivity." He claimed he could not move without more means. He continued to inflate enemy strength, placing Johnston's army at not less than 150,000, when in fact the rebel army at Manassas and Centerville stood between 30 and 35,000. On November 1st, General Scott's request to retire was granted, and he departed the capital for West Point. McClellan anticipated his elevation to commanding general. On October 26, McClellan informed his wife that he had been at Montgomery Blair's home with Senators Wade, Trumbull, and Chandler, discussing the Scott situation. McClellan wrote he was assured that tomorrow they will make a desperate effort to have General Scott retired at once. On October 31st, he wrote Mary Ellen that he felt a sense of relief to have things his own way. President Lincoln expressed some concern about the double burden imposed by McClellan's new position as commanding general and told him he could draw upon all the assistance the president was fit to offer. Little Mac replied, "I can do it all." With Scott out of the way, the young Napoleon simply shifted the blame for inaction onto the president and the cabinet. It is terrible to stand by and see the cowardice of the president, the vileness of Seward, and rascality of Cameron. Wells is an old woman, and Bates an old fool. If McClellan now had his own way, he was assuredly the only one in Washington in so enviable a position. With the army now in winter quarters, there was real fear that European nations might be inclined to recognize the Confederacy. On December 31st, Benjamin Wade visited the White House and told the president, "You are murdering your country by inches in consequence of the inactivity of the military and the want of a distinct policy in regard to slavery." A few days later, Representative Henry Dawes wrote to his wife that the times are exceedingly dark and gloomy. "I have never seen a time when they were so much so. Confidence in everybody is shaken to the very foundation. The credit of the country is ruined, its arms impotent, its cabinet incompetent, its servants rotten, its ruin inevitable." In a letter home to his family, Senator Fessenden of Maine confessed that everybody is grumbling because nothing is done, and there are no symptoms that anything will be done. The truth is that no man can be found who is equal to this crisis in any branch of the government. As for President Lincoln, he had to admit that he had begun to believe that McClellan will never get ready to fight. Once the phrase "all quiet on the Potomac" was something of a comfort or a simple statement of fact. By January of 1862, it had become an expression of derision.